Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Mark Borstein. I'm the CTO at Tremolo Security and also the co-author of Kubernetes and Enterprise Guide Second Edition. Today, we are going to deploy Open Unison with Okta. We're going to focus on using Okta for authentication into our Kubernetes cluster. Why would you want to do this with Open Unison? Well, first off, it's easy. Second off, it gives you SSO for both the dashboard and the CLI. Also has a nice little plugin for zero configuration um, login. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get right to it. So I'm going to start off here. I've got my cluster up and running, and I'm going to start here. This is the deploying the authentication portal screen or documentation. And let's go through our prerequisites. So we already have an ingress control. We're using Nginx in this instance. We'll do our base configuration, site specific, so that's where we actually integrate Okta. And then finally, we'll deploy to the portal and integrate our cluster. Now, this is optional because we're actually going to use impersonation, just to keep the video a little shorter. So we already have Nginx set up, and I've already got the dashboard set up, so I don't have to worry about redeploying that. So let's start with our base configuration. So we'll create the namespace. Just clear our screen. And then let's go ahead and create our repos. Now these are already here, but doesn't hurt. So the next step is let's deploy our operator. And so the operator is what does most of the deployment heavy lifting outside of manifest. It creates key stores, generates the appropriate certificates when it comes to working with the webhooks for admission controllers. So we've got to get that up and running first. So that's now up and running. And if I take a look, I'll see that I've got, or excuse me, kube control get pods and Open Unison. I now have one pod running in my Open Unison namespace. So next up, we're going to create our source secret. So you never want to create, you never want to store secrets inside of your Helm charts. So we always keep all of our secrets outside the Helm charts, and then Open Unison will read that directly in. So let's go ahead and, even though the instructions say don't use these exact values, I'm going to use these exact values. Now, what to point out here, the two keys that we're creating, this Kate's DB secret, this is a secret that's shared between Open Unison itself to enable SSO with dashboard. It's not something that users ever see. The Unison key store password, again, this is a password so that if for some reason you need to debug and download a generated key store, you have access to it. Again, these values are never shared with users. They should just be large random values. One pro tip, if you are going to generate this using the echo command, make sure to do echo-n, so that way it removes the extra carriage return. All right, so next up is we got to download the default values.yaml, which I've already done. And so here are my default values.yaml, and we're going to set up our hosts. Now, I'm using nip.io because I don't feel like setting up a dedicated DNS server. Except I did this wrong. So what we're going to do is we're just going to replace this with this. So what this means now is nip. So what nip.io does is you give it a host name with an IP address in it, it gives you back that IP address. So that way you don't have to stand up your own DNS server. Makes life a lot easier. And the only other thing we're going to do is we're going to enable impersonation. So what that means is that instead of integrating our API server directly with our Open Unison instance in order to make Kubernetes trust our Open Unison, we're just going to use impersonation. It makes the integration a lot simpler, a lot faster, and it'll work whether you're using this on an on-prem system or like we are here, or you're up in EKS, GKE, SIVO, whatever. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to leave everything else for now as the default. So let's go ahead and go to the next step. So we've got impersonation enabled, we've got our network set up. Next, we have to set up authentication. So let's choose an identity source, and we want to use OpenID Connect, and we're going to integrate with Okta. So we are going to go through these steps. So let's go to Okta, which I have here, and we're going to create a new app. It's going to be OpenID Connect, and it's going to be a web application. All right, so we're going to call this my Kate's cluster. Not going to bother with that, and we're going to definitely want to, here we're going to change our sign-in redirect. So this is just walking you through those steps. And so this is kind of where the rubber hits the road here. We want to make sure that our redirect is correct. Oops. And if we come back to our Open Unison values YAML, so we want this, the Open Unison host, to be our host name in the callback. So the callback is important because that's how OpenID Connect knows that you are not doing something nefarious. There are a lot of redirects in OpenID Connect, and so what your identity provider, in this case Okta, wants to do is make sure that you're not being redirected to a nefarious third-party actor. And so you have to pre-authorize what URLs you're allowed to redirect to. And I think we need to put in a trusted origin. I guess we don't. And then we're just going to let everybody into the party for now. Now, obviously, not everybody will probably have access in Okta, so you're going to want to limit this somehow, but this is a demo, so we're just going to start there. All right, so we have our settings. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to configure so that way we send groups. So we're going to go over to sign on. And we're going to go down to OpenID Connect ID token. And we're going to do using group claims. Oh, that's the documentation. I want to do documentation. Edit. There we go. And we're going to do matches regex. So this is useful if like you wanted to limit which claims or which groups. So for instance, maybe you just have Kubernetes groups that start with Kate's dash as an example, instead of sending all the groups. So we've done that. And now the last step is to go ahead and configure Open Unison. So we need to get some information here. So let's go back to the general page. We need the client ID. That's going to go right into our values.yaml. So we are going to uncomment OIDC. Oops. It's YAML, so it's going to get very angry with me if I don't have indenting right. So then we're going to do, we'll come back to client secret. So we're going to get the Okta domain. That's going to be our issuer. And I think that's basically it. And then we need to get the client secret. So let's get that client secret. Edit secret, orchestra secret source. All right. And what do I need the name of it to be? It's going to be OIDC client secret. And we're going to get the value over here. Now, this is where I was talking about how you want to make sure you're using echo-n instead of echo. So here's an example. So this is my client secret. I'm going to go ahead and base64 encode that. But and save it. So now this is my secret, right? I know, command not found. Now let's do echo into base 64. Okay, now let's do echo -n. These are not the same. Oh, these actually are the same. No, these are not the same. You can see here this O at the end, right before the padding. That's because echo without the -n adds an extra carriage return. That's going to break your secrets. You're going to get all sorts of havoc. So either use a tool like I do. Visual Studio Code has a great base 64 encoding tool. I use that. Or make sure you're doing echo -n. Really important. All right, so I got that part done. And our setup is now okay. With Okta, it's really important that you set user in ID token to false. That's because Okta doesn't include groups in the ID token. You've got to go back and hit the user info endpoint. And let's go back to deploying the portal. So we've done that. So let's go ahead and install Orchestra. That's our first execution layer, if I could speak. Oops. Yeah. Oh, wait, that's right. I'm in the wrong one. That would have been bad. Documents, projects, NAS. Okay. All right, so that chart's going to deploy. It will probably take a minute or two. A lot going on. That's setting up your ingress objects, your deployment, there's a cron job that checks certificates for you. And it's also setting up Open Unison. So there's a lot going on. And in fact, we now have a little command here that you can just execute. And it's just going to run until the pod's ready. So we are going to take a quick break. And when this comes back, we'll finish the implementation. All right, so that's done. So if we do kube control get pods and Open Unison, there we go. So we've got 3 pods here. We've got the operator. So we had that deployed before. We have Orchestra, which is really the workhorse. That's our main pod. And then we have Kubo IDC proxy. So that's what handles impersonation for us. And if we take a real quick look here, oops, kube control logs. So we'll see that we've got all of these errors. Unknown URI. That's okay. That's going to go away when we deploy the second part of this, which is going to be our configuration Helm charts. Open Unison is dynamically configured based on Kubernetes custom resources. So it's really important to have a admission controller that's validating those beyond what the simple validation that Kubernetes does. And so we need to make sure that those are up and running first. So now we get to go to the last step here. So we're going to go ahead and deploy the portal. And the great thing about this is once this is done deploying, we're ready to go. We're ready to log in. And that was nice and quick. Now, there is an additional pod that gets deployed. So, nope, that was right the first time. So we can now see Kubo IDC proxy is working. That's because Orchestra is now working. The last thing we need to wait on is this OU HTML pod. So this supplies all the HTML that you will see as part of the portal. So that makes it a little easier to be able to customize, change styles, etc. So that's all up and running. Let's go ahead and log in. So now I'm going to log in over here in a private browser. And you can see I do this demo quite a bit. So it doesn't like our cert, which for now is fine. So I'm going to log in as M. Mosley. I'm now signed in. That's my username, kind of difficult. And then here are my groups right out of Okta. So now if I go over to Kubernetes dashboard, we'll see a bunch of errors. I am not authorized to do anything. So let's go ahead and fix that by creating a RBAC binding. So I'm going to cheat here. This one was created based off of my environment. So kube control create F. So what this RBAC binding is saying is that any user who's a member of the K8s admins group will be added to the cluster admin cluster role binding, which means they can do anything they want. So now if we come back here, we're going to see that I now can come and go to nodes as an example, and now I can see everything. I'm now an admin. So let's go ahead and, because I can show you here, I'm a member of K8s admins. So let's go ahead and close that out. And let's look at kube control tokens. So everything that we need in order to log in is right here. We've got a Windows command, we've got a Linux command. We also have CA certificates if we wanted to, but we're actually already setting up a command for you that has everything. So like here's my kube control command. Let's come here to code, and I'm going to say kubeconfig gets temp G. If I do kube control get nodes, nothing in there. So I'm going to paste this command, and that created everything for me. So kube control get nodes, and it takes a second, and there we go. So that's the really cool part is now if I take a look at temp G, everything's there. Certificate authority data, server information, user, the whole thing is set up for me. I didn't have to know anything. So like if you got to use a jump box or something, this is great. Now, a lot of people don't like this workflow, and I understand why. They don't want to open up a web browser, log in, click, paste. It can get a little tedious, especially when you've got such great muscle memory, as most developers, we do. And so they want to log in directly from the CLI. So that's the next thing we're going to do. So we do have a plugin that lets you go from zero configuration to up and running with one command. Now, the downside to this approach is, or not really the downside, is the command doesn't support self-signed certificates. We've got to have a trusted certificate. So I already have get namespace. So I already have Cert Manager deployed, and like most enterprises, we're going to assume that we have some kind of root CA that we're going to trust, and my system's already trusted it. So next thing we're going to do is go ahead and redeploy Open Unison, but this time using our signed CA certificate. So first thing we're going to do, and we're following the instructions, if we come here, knowledge base, and certificate management. So this is where we're following the instructions in order to upgrade to using our CA cert. So first thing I'm going to do is delete the OU TLS secret. So this is the certificate that's being used. I still don't know how to type apparently. There we go. So this is the secret that's used to by your ingress to serve a certificate. So we're going to regenerate that. And then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to come here to our Helm chart. We're going to add a new annotation. And oh, for the life of me, I cannot remember. Cert managers ingress annotation. All right, this is the part I always forget. Here we go. All right, so we're going to add a annotation. It is cert manager .io cluster issuer, and we have one cluster issuer. Oh, right. All right, it's called CA issuer. So that is going to add that annotation to our ingress object, which will then trigger cert manager to create a certificate with the information out of our ingress. So we don't have to worry about issuing certificates on our own, creating certificate objects, any of that nonsense. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to, because if we take a look at our instructions, we don't want to redistribute the CA certificate. It's already, most enterprises are going to pre-distribute this cert, so you don't have to worry about pre-distributing it. So we're going to add it to our list of trusted certs, and we're going to call it Unison CA. PEM base 64, and then here is my certificate. I cheated and got that working first. All right. So that is now encoded. And so the next thing we're going to do is going to go ahead and upgrade. Orchestra and Tremolo, Orchestra, and Open Unison, F. So that is going to update our values.yaml and also, or excuse me, that's going to update our ingress and also update our key store that gets generated. So it's actually going to generate a new orchestra object, and we see that that's running. And the next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to upgrade our login portal. Now, most configurations, you only need to update the login portal, but because this changes the certificates and the infrastructure, you got to upgrade both. And so we're just going to go ahead and wait for our new Orchestra login portal to be running, our old one to terminate. All right, so our pod has redeployed. We should be in good shape. Let's go ahead and log back in. And so we have a good certificate, able to get into the dashboard. Not really sure why. There we go. Oh, ingress and extensions, not a big deal. Come over here to, yeah, because there's nothing in the default namespace. So we go to nodes, we're good to go. Okay, cool. So our dashboard's working. So now for the fun part, let's go ahead and log in directly to our cluster without having to sign in first. So I'm actually going to log out. That way there's nothing up my sleeves. And in fact, I'm going to need to log out of Okta here because it's going to actually launch there. So I'm now signed out of Okta. All right, so export kubeconfig gets temp. We'll call it F. So if we do kubecontrol get nodes, right? No configuration there. Temp F. No file. So kubecontrol OU login host equals, and we're just going to use the host name because we're going to assume HTTPS. Pops open a browser. I'm going to sign in. Login complete. We look down here. Everything's now configured. We went from zero configuration to being able to access our cluster using the OU login plugin. And the great thing is you install it using crew. So you just type in kube control crew install OU login. And of course, I already have it installed, so it skipped it. So yeah, so now here's the really fun part that your security people are going to love. You're doing your work, you're done for the day. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to explicitly log out. Actually, not sure if this will work. So here's what we're going to do is get nodes. Oh, no, that actually did work. So logging out kills the session. Once the session is killed, you can't get into your token anymore because that session is constantly refreshing. So we've done that whole gambit of let's deploy it, sign in, reconfigure it so that we're working with a trusted CA. Go ahead and set up the OU login plugin, and now we can do zero configuration logins. So thanks very much, and we'll see you for our next videos.